Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers and walks right beside you unnoticed. For years, one man crossed the United States with a calm that felt almost supernatural, burying kill kits, selecting random victims, and studying other serial killers like an entomologist studies insects. His name? Israel Keyes, a cold predator, a strategist of horror, and perhaps the most methodical and terrifying criminal the FBI has ever interrogated. Keyes wasn't chasing fame. Quite the opposite. He wanted to stay invisible. No pattern, no profile, a ghost following a trail of blood. But when he was finally caught, what he revealed shocked even the most seasoned federal agents. This video will take you on a chilling journey through the twisted mind, the brutal crimes, and the most disturbing confessions of a man who studied serial killers just to become an even more effective one. If you're someone who dares to dive deep into the darkest corners of the human mind, subscribe now, hit that like button, and get ready. What you're about to hear might just keep you awake tonight. From a very young age, Israel Keyes moved among others with eyes that didn't seem to match his age. By the time he was 14, the signs were already there. Severe social withdrawal, laughter that never matched the moment, and a silence that didn't come from shyness, but from holding back something much darker. There was a kind of emptiness in his stare, like he was always watching, but never really there. The environment where he grew up was isolated, almost off the map. No television, no internet, no regular schooling. His world was a bubble shaped by religious fanaticism and the rigid silence of a cold household. But inside that bubble, a dark garden began to grow, fertile ground for twisted thoughts he never dared to speak aloud. From an early age, Israel learned that secrecy was his greatest weapon, and so he began to hide. Hide thoughts, hide intentions, hide desires that slowly evolved into violent fantasies. He didn't want to get caught. He didn't want attention. He wanted freedom, to explore the abyss expanding inside him. While other boys dreamed of careers, love stories, or adventures, Israel found himself fascinated by the suffering of others. There was no guilt, no inner conflict, just a strange, eerie peace when he imagined having complete control over another human being's life. Slowly, fantasy turned into intention, but he knew it wasn't time to act. Not yet. He had to watch, learn, train. The killer the world would come to fear years later was already alive inside a quiet teenager, wandering the woods, harboring thoughts that would make any psychiatrist shudder. When Israel Keyes was finally arrested in 2012, investigators weren't entirely sure what or who they were dealing with. But it only took a few minutes of recorded footage to realize this wasn't your average suspect. Over more than 40 hours of interrogation, Keyes spoke with an unnerving calm. No rush, no emotion, as if he were describing a regular day in his life, except that day involved kidnapping, torture, and meticulously planned murder. Every word that came out of his mouth felt rehearsed, like he had told the story 1,000 times. To himself, he wasn't trying to justify the crimes. He didn't show guilt. Quite the opposite. There was a subtle satisfaction in the way he described the details, how he watched fear unfold, how he studied the silence before the strike, how he decided when and how someone would die. Veteran FBI agents, some with decades of field experience, were stunned. Israel didn't just kill, he planned, he engineered. Each murder was treated like a blueprint, a coldly calculated act of precision. It was as if Ted Bundy had studied every failure of past serial killers and decided to perfect evil itself, pushing it to the edge of pure logic. When asked why he put so much care into his crimes, Keyes simply smiled. He said he had learned from others' mistakes. He knew exactly what the FBI looked for when profiling serial killers. So he did the opposite. He killed randomly, changed states, buried evidence years in advance. He built his own personal handbook for the perfect crime. But throughout the recordings, one thing made it all even more disturbing. He looked happy, not excited, not manic, but deeply content, as if retelling these murders brought him a dark, quiet pleasure. He wasn't a man who killed in a moment of rage. He killed because he wanted to. He didn't cry for a single victim, but found satisfaction in describing each one. Israel Keyes left no trail, because every step had been planned long before the first blow was ever struck. He moved through the United States like a regular traveler, driving down long highways, sleeping in cheap motels, always paying in cash. But beneath the floors of the places he passed through, something was buried. Something dark, something terrifying. Murder kits, airtight buckets filled with weapons, knives, ropes, industrial cleaning supplies, ammunition, even disguises. Israel buried them months, sometimes years, before committing any crime. He didn't pick a victim and then prepare. He prepared everything first, and then chose who would die. There was no pattern. Age, gender, location, all of it was chosen based on convenience. That's what made him so hard to track. By the time the FBI built a profile, he was already 3 steps ahead. The killings were cold, fast, and carried out with surgical precision. Then he'd go home, as if nothing had ever happened. This near military level of planning was no coincidence. He studied routes, mapped out the habits of small towns, memorized the blind spots of surveillance cameras. He avoided using cell phones, relied on paper maps, and never struck in the same state where he lived, like a hunter preparing the perfect trap and patiently waiting for the right prey to walk by. That methodology made Israel Keyes one of the most dangerous and untraceable serial killers in modern history. Some of his murder kits may still be buried. Some of his victims remain unidentified. And the most disturbing part? He confessed to crimes the FBI still doesn't know how to find. On the night of February 1, 2012, in Anchorage, Alaska, an 18-year-old young woman named Samantha Koenig was working alone at a coffee stand. Surveillance footage shows a man walking in calmly, ordering a coffee, and within seconds, pulling a gun on her. It was the last time Samantha was seen alive, and the beginning of one of the cruelest crimes in the history of American criminal investigation. Israel Keyes dragged her through the biting Alaskan snow and took her to his home. In his own garage, while his daughter slept just a few feet away, he tied up, raped, and murdered Samantha Koenig. Then he stored her body in a freezer for weeks. But what came next was even more disturbing. Days later, with her body still frozen, Keyes sewed Samantha's eyes open and applied makeup to make her appear alive. He staged the scene, placed a recent newspaper beside her, and took a Polaroid photo. That picture was sent to Samantha's parents, along with a ransom demand. His goal? To torture not just Samantha, but her family too. While her parents clung to the hope that their daughter was still alive, Keyes was off on a family vacation, relaxing as if nothing had happened. During that time, he used her debit card at ATMs across multiple states, and that slip, that tiny spark of arrogance or carelessness, is what the FBI tracked, and ultimately used to bring him down. Samantha Koenig's case was the only one with undeniable, concrete evidence. But in Keyes' own words, she was just the exception, because according to him, every other murder was committed with no connection, no pattern, and no trace. Samantha was the mistake, the one that exposed the monster. Long before Israel Keyes became a meticulous killer, he was already a product of a world shaped by intolerance, isolation, and religious fanaticism. His childhood was built inside a reality where modern medicine was rejected, traditional education was considered dangerous, and religion was interpreted with brutal rigidity. The Keyes family lived in the shadows, deep in remote forests, far from society, under the grip of extremist ideologies. His parents raised him within a fringe group that flirted with white supremacist beliefs and preached total distrust of the government. He grew up listening to sermons about the apocalypse, racial purity, and spiritual domination. No TV, no internet, no friends. Silence was the language of the house, and within that silence, Israel started building a world of his own, a world filled with voices no one else could hear. But it wasn't just isolation, there was violence, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but scars the mind forever. The absence of affection, no human touch, no emotional warmth, every cry ignored, every tear suppressed. He learned early on that weakness wasn't allowed, that pain should be buried, that the world was the enemy. It was in that emotional vacuum that Israel began crafting his first fantasies. He wasn't taught to love, he was taught to obey, and when he didn't obey, he paid the price. Years later, Keyes would say that by the time he was 10 years old, he already knew something was different about him. But in that kind of environment, different meant invisible. Israel Keyes' childhood didn't make him a killer, but it gave him all the ingredients. Isolation, extremism, repression, a boiling cauldron where psychopathy could grow unchecked. No questions, no empathy, no boundaries. That boy never stood a chance, and the world would end up paying the price. Even in his teenage years, Keyes began showing signs of a disturbing pleasure. Destruction, not the usual teenage rebellion, but a dark craving to cause suffering. He tied up cats and shot them with a pellet gun, watching their reactions with a blank, detached stare. Once he skinned a deer while it was still alive, just to feel the power of controlling another creature's pain. Not even the radical religious groups he attended could tolerate him for long. He was too cold, too strange, too much, even for the fanatics. Alone within his own isolation, Keyes found comfort in secret rituals of cruelty. He became increasingly methodical, breaking into abandoned houses, destroying property, starting small fires, all just to feel like he could command chaos. While the adults around him ignored the warning signs, Israel dove deeper into a personal spiral of violence. Always in silence, no emotional outbursts. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he simply acted and observed. He wasn't seeking attention, he was chasing sensation. The pleasure didn't come from the act itself, but from domination, knowing he held the power to decide between life and death, even if it was just an animal. Over time, he developed a kind of twisted philosophy. He believed the rules didn't apply to him, that the suffering of others was just part of his personal experiment, a cruel lab in which he was the sole scientist, and everyone else around him was a disposable test subject. This behavior, ignored in his youth, became the fertile soil for the killer he would one day become. The boy who killed animals without remorse simply changed his prey as he got older, and the real world, the one that never wanted to see him, would soon come face to face with the fury that lived behind that seemingly ordinary face. In the late 1990s, Israel Keyes did something unexpected. He enlisted in the United States Army. For many, that might have been the road to redemption, discipline, structure, purpose. But for Keyes, the military wasn't salvation. It was a new playground, an advanced course for someone who had already chosen his real profession. Stationed at bases in Egypt and Washington, he was seen as an exemplary soldier. He received medals, praise, and glowing evaluations. Punctual, obedient, quiet. But while others spent their downtime laughing and relaxing, Keyes drank alone and watched violent videos for hours. At night, he walked the base in silence, not patrolling against an external enemy, but against the impulses rising inside him. Even there, he tested boundaries. He stole small items, entered restricted areas, pushed limits, just to see how far he could go without raising suspicion, and he never did. To his superiors, he was just another quiet soldier. To himself, he was building his ultimate disguise, the persona of a man above suspicion. After leaving the army, Keyes took things even further. He opened a construction company, attended community events, built a loyal clientele. He had a young daughter. People saw him as a caring father. But this normal life wasn't accidental. It was a suit of armor, a mask carefully crafted to hide the creature behind his calm eyes. This duality made him even more dangerous. Keyes knew how to disappear in plain sight. He could smile at neighbors while burying kill kits in his backyard. His daily routine became his alibi. Normalcy was his costume. While he built houses, he also built traps. While he fixed roofs, he decided who would die the following week. When Israel Keyes was interrogated, what he revealed stunned FBI agents. His crimes weren't limited to Alaska, and they weren't limited to Samantha Koenig. He had murdered across multiple U.S. states, and most terrifying of all, the majority of those crimes were never linked to anyone. Cold cases, filed away, forgotten. Keyes described, with chilling clarity, how he planned attacks in distant places where he had zero personal ties. He would fly or drive hundreds of miles, often without a clear destination, simply to check on his hidden kits. Once the location and opportunity lined up, he'd choose a random victim and strike. This strategy kept local law enforcement blind. How could anyone suspect a man from Alaska of a murder in Vermont, or Texas, or New York? He became a ghost. No trace, no pattern, no name. Keyes also knew exactly how to stay off the grid. He used disguises, destroyed credit cards, removed SIM cards, avoided any technology that could expose him. No messages, no trophies. To him, his victims were part of a quiet game, and he was the only one who knew the rules. To this day, the FBI believes Israel Keyes is connected to at least 11 murders, but the real number may be far higher. And even after his death, buckets remain buried across American soil, waiting, relics of a web of killings that may never be fully uncovered. For Israel Keyes, killing wasn't just the end. It was the process, a ritual of absolute control, where the victim's suffering was essential to the experience. He didn't see himself as an impulsive monster, but as a meticulous executor who needed to watch, feel, manipulate. It wasn't the blood that fed him, it was the fear. During interrogations, Keyes described how he studied every move his victims made. He tracked patterns. He knew when they were most vulnerable, and when he captured them, the moment of greatest satisfaction wasn't the kill, it was the anticipation, the tension, the look in their eyes as they realized there was no way out. He justified his crimes with cold logic, claimed he never killed children, as if that drew some moral line that redeemed him. But the FBI believes he may be linked to the disappearances of homeless youth, especially in areas where his bank cards were used. And in those cases, there were no cameras, no witnesses, no bodies. Keyes saw himself as superior, an intellectual predator. He claimed he wasn't like other serial killers, that he had studied their mistakes, didn't seek fame, and left no clues. Yet at the same time, he seemed to crave recognition for his efficiency. There was a twisted pride in his silence, like a man who believed that even behind bars he was still winning. His need for control didn't end with death. It continued afterward, manipulating families, misleading authorities, erasing evidence. Every phase was another form of domination, and the more time passed, the more he refined his methods, like a dark artist who never stopped perfecting his craft. Keyes' downfall began with a mistake, a small, almost careless one, using the debit card of his victim, Samantha Koenig. In broad daylight, surveillance cameras captured blurry images of a man in a cap and dark jacket using ATMs across several states. The FBI stepped in, tracking every transaction, until, at a gas station in Texas, the predator was finally stopped. At the time of arrest, Keyes didn't resist. He was calm, almost indifferent, but inside his car was a silent arsenal, maps with handwritten notes, loaded weapons, ropes, chemicals, masks, cash stained with security ink, disassembled cell phones, a fully operational abduction kit, living proof that the killer was still hunting. Investigators knew they hadn't just caught a criminal, they had captured an anomaly, a man who traveled the country, killed without pattern, erased his trail, and went home like nothing had happened. The kind of killer who disappears into crime statistics until it's too late. With his arrest came the interrogations, hour after hour of cold, clipped confessions punctuated by calculated pauses. He never told everything, only enough to keep control of the story. He'd confess to one murder and hide 3, mention one victim, and stay silent about others. Even behind bars, he stayed one step ahead. But in the end, it wasn't the FBI who put a stop to his story. In December 2012, Israel Keyes died by suicide in his cell. He left behind a note, encrypted, cryptic, filled with symbols and disturbing drawings. Once again, controlling the narrative to the very end, dying in silence, taking his secrets with him, and leaving behind one final chilling question. How many victims are still out there, waiting to be found? Israel Keyes never sought fame. He didn't want headlines. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted silence, anonymity. He wanted to be the perfect killer, and in many ways, he came dangerously close. But his existence proves something terrifying. The most dangerous predators aren't the ones who scream. They're the ones who whisper, the ones who go unnoticed, the ones who live right next door. How many lives did he take? No one really knows. How many bodies will never be found? No one can say for sure. What we do know is that he studied others like him, BTK, Ted Bundy, the giants of American horror, and surpassed them in coldness, precision, and control. Evil, in its most polished and impersonal form. Keyes reminds us that true horror doesn't always come wrapped in the grotesque. Sometimes it comes dressed as ordinary. Psychopathy can wear a uniform, smile at neighbors, pick up a child from school. Some of the worst killers don't need a dark basement, just a car, a plan, and time. And while his murder kits remain buried, possibly waiting for someone to stumble upon them, one haunting question lingers. Who else is out there? Who else has studied the failures, perfected the craft, and walks among us, invisible until it's too late? If you want to keep exploring the darkest cases, the most twisted minds, and the crimes that defy logic, subscribe to the channel, because some stories the world tried to forget, we're going to bring them back, one by one.